What's up, everybody? Thanks for stopping by the Broskiedoodles podcast. Today we have a fun-filled, packed episode for you, so stay tuned. Check it out. Let me know what you think in the comments below.
All right, bro. So check it out.
A whale's vagina.
So check it out, bro. The Broskiedoodles, they at home. They know what it is.
They do.
I wanted to talk to you about something that relates to us strongly. Fuck. Sorry about my mic situation. Sorry. I wanted to talk to you about something that relates to us deeply because we actually do one of those, and it's podcast and the revolution that is happening right now with so many podcasts coming up and about, not only in the last years but also right now with the whole pandemic. A lot of people decided to start their podcast now. We actually decided to start now. I don't know if it was a coincidence, but it sort of all came together. But what do you think about this new phenomenon with the podcast format?
So I actually want to talk a little bit. Well, the end of my spiel will be that, but it's funny because when this pandemic started, I didn't even have a notion to create a podcast. I liked it. I worked in the audio industry. I had the gear, but I was like, that'd be cool to have a show, but I don't know if people are going to listen. And then all of a sudden me and you reconnect and it's like, oh, dude, I've been thinking about it. I'm trying to do this and this, but I really would love to bounce ideas off of somebody. And since we've been friends for such a long time, it was so funny how it all just zoomed in to this one, or it all kind of came about in this one time frame of our lives, of everybody's life. So, and I guess it's so funny because to me, the future of podcasting is what we're doing here, right? It's the accessibility of having, little to no overhead, getting it started to the point where people like Joe Rogan or other huge podcasts are there now because it doesn't take a lot, but you got to just put it out there. I think we talked about it a little bit on a different episode. We just have to do it. And I think the future of podcasts, I don't even know. I'm fresh in the game to podcasts, and I think I think calling the future on podcast specifically would be kind of a tough thing to say. But
let's try to pick at each other's brain and see what we think could be the future. I myself, I'm a big connoisseur of podcasts. I've been listening to podcasts for a while, even before the craze now, which seems to be more popular, and I love that. Actually, recently, the mark passed on iTunes podcast, so there's officially now more than 1 million podcasts available. And technically speaking, the Google Podcast archive of podcasts, I mean, if it's not there, then it's probably not a podcast that's worth. I mean, I'm saying most podcasts are there, with the exception of very few that for one reason or another are not there. But that's pretty much a good number or measurement of how many podcasts are out there. And if you think about it, it's not really that much if you put it in the whole industry. How many millions of channels are in YouTube, for example? Right. I bet it's a lot more. But for podcasts, it's impressive that those numbers are being hit now. And I'm actually excited to see the future of this because, when we started this podcast, I've been wanting to do this podcast for a long time. And to be honest, one of the things that was making it hard is that I wanted to do it with somebody because I knew that bouncing ideas with somebody was going to get the best out of my own analysis of things. But it was hard to find somebody to do it with where I lived because, I had a lot of great people that I knew I could have good conversations with. You being one of them, but I live in Spain, you live in the US, so it was very difficult, right? So when this whole pandemic thing hit, and I spoke to you because I had seen you recently a few months back in Miami when I visited, and we always see each other, and it's super cool. And then I spoke to you on the phone recently because I knew you were gonna get married, and I wanted to find out a bit about that. And I saw people that started already doing things online remotely because I felt that a podcast remotely, not with the people being physically there, was not really gonna work. But when this whole pandemic started, I realized that if it's done correctly, if it's done with good quality, like so that it doesn't look like a fucking webcam little session, which is horrible. But if it looks good, if it has quality, then I think it could work. And that's when I asked you to do it, and we started doing this. But what you're saying is so right. Like, the cost of entry is very little. There's gonna be a lot of competition, and there is, but the cost of entry is little, and because you don't have to have that many things. I mean, in your case and in my case, because we're already involved in the audio business. Either we're creating or selling, we already had equipment for it. But even if you don't, you could start with small equipment and start your own podcast and talk about your niche. Whatever it is that it is that you like. And the cool thing about podcasting is that even though there's a lot of competition, I feel like there's a lot of cake for everybody because there's so many interests. And the cool thing about podcasts is that it goes to little niche. Like, you don't have to have a huge podcast. I mean, I think like Joe Rogan's podcast started like a niche podcast, but it got so big, that niche, that is now kind of like, I wouldn't say mainstream, but a lot of people
like it has everything on there.
But in general, podcasts, the way that they work is they're very niche to their audiences. So I have podcasts, for example, that talk about economy because I like to know how the economy is doing, right? And then I have another one that is always talking about football, right? And what, soccer, football here in Europe, how all the leagues are doing, how all the players are doing, and I like to listen because of that. And then I have another guy that talks about, like, what are the best components for computers that are coming out so that you can build the best computer for gaming, for video editing. And those are very specific things. So, but you're able to have somebody that is going to give you a podcast and ongoing information of this little niche things that you like. So I think it brings forward a new way of entertainment and also a new way of education. I think the podcasts that I listen to are like half of it entertainment, but the other half I'm getting information and knowledge and having my mind actually do critical thinking in the process. And it is what I hope that we are also doing for the people that listen to our podcast. I mean, the whole reason for me doing this podcast is to have people have their minds engaged and think about shit. Because even if you disagree with what we're saying, you could be like, wait, I don't agree with that, but fuck, I never thought of it that way. And then you can make your own mind grow and become a better thinker. So I think that's what podcast has brought to us, and I think it's a great thing. The future is going to be great.
And that's funny that you just mentioned the future, because honestly, you said it right. There's so much little cost to enter, right? Mind you, a podcast is audio first. So for those in who want to start a podcast, you're going to have a lot of competition, and maybe you might want to eventually get to having maybe a video set up like how we have or how other, big players are doing it. However, I think that shouldn't deter you from even beginning, because there's going to be a lot of things that got to get ironed out. And another thing too about podcasts that versus video versus like a YouTube channel or something like that, for me, is the accessibility to information, right? I mean, I was telling you, when we were just talking about podcasts, that I think for me, the reason I wasn't into podcasts since the beginning is more because, I didn't want to dedicate an entire hour to something that I may not have had an hour for in that moment, right? Okay. And a lot of people don't have the ability to multitask. Some radio shows are not involved, or not like disengaging enough. That's not the right word, but I guess what I'm saying is I can't multitask. I can't work and listen to this like riveting story, right? The only podcasts I used to listen to were like story-based podcasts, like fictionals or documentaries, but like that they would take you, they would suck you in, and I'm like, well, I can't work like this. Like, I'm on edge. I get in there.
By the way, those aren't podcasts. Those are something else, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But continue. Okay.
But when technically they're not. But when I look at podcasts on Spotify, those were the only ones that I would click on under that section, because those are the ones that I like the most. However, what if the future? Okay. Let's talk about a little bit what's to come. And this is coming from someone who has not been part of this realm for very long at all, nor do I consider myself an expert. But what if podcasts in the future are going to be able to be searchable specifically for things that people are interested in listening to, and not just topics. I'm talking about what happened, World War I, Britain, and then it'll give you the like, we'll have some sort of technology that can scan audio and bring you exactly to the words being said. You see what I'm saying?
So kind of like when you search on Google and you put a sentence, it searches all text documents where that sentence might have been said or a word. What you're saying is that, but with audio. It searches all the audio in all the podcasts to find where people are talking about this topic that you said, and then recommend. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, like,
I'm
for
not
instance,
sure
your computer.
I'm not sure if that's happening, but I don't think so, because that looks complicated. But that's a good thing that you're saying there, because now that we are having the world of audio archives, where in the past it was books and encyclopedias and shit, now everything, even books, are being put out on audio formats because it's easier to digest, it's more practical. And now that we're going to have so much of it, I like what you're saying. People are going to be able to search for topics, and then the system, the algorithm, will be able to find podcasts that already have those topics. But not only because it was mentioned on the heading or the title of the podcast, but actually within the audio. So I'm pretty sure the technology is there, and they just got to apply it.
Yeah, they're already kind of doing it. I mean, like, at my current job, I'll search, how to do XYZ, right? And they'll literally bring me to the video and the minute in the video that this thing is explaining that part. It's crazy. It's crazy. Or like cooking. Tasty actually is the one but that's cheating because it's their own platform. But I was impressed by it because I was like, oh, how do you do the pickled onions on that video? Or I just typed in pickled onions and it brought me to that video and to that part of the video. Although that video was not titled pickled onions. It was a burger video. Yeah,
well, maybe we have tags and shit. But I get what you're saying. I'm pretty sure the technology is there regardless. But
it will
that's
be.
Crazy.
I do see it. I can imagine it already.
One thing that you were saying is that at the beginning, because you don't listen to that much podcasts, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and you said that you couldn't digest an hour or 2 hours of content, and I want to get your opinion on it at work or whatever. Yeah, because you were saying, like, for example, that you used to listen to like this riveted stories through an audio format. But I get exactly what you're saying, and let me give you my side of the story. When you are listening to like a story, like an audio book, it's hard to listen to that and do other things, because the book, the story, it needs your full focus, and your mind is going to try to concentrate fully on that. However, podcasts, and I mean, there are podcasts that sometimes you want to hear with a little more focus, but the way that they're designed, at least for me, is I don't have, I have like 10 podcasts that I listen to on a weekly basis. I don't have time to sit for an hour and listen to those podcasts one by one every week. However, when I'm going to work and I gotta, get on the metro, there's an hour commute. So there's a podcast that I'm listening to right there. Yeah. And then after that, I gotta go back home after work, and then I listen to one there. And then I have lunch in work, for example, and I can listen to one there. So pretty much the beauty of podcasts for me is that you're able to digest it on the dead times that you have throughout the day. Like you're driving, in your case, you have a vehicle, because in the U.S., in Miami, they don't really have public transportation. But on the way to work and back, you can listen to a podcast there. Yep. And it's not, I believe, podcasts do not require the same amount of attention that an audiobook would require, like you were mentioning. Because, like, even if you're listening to this podcast right now, I mean, you could sort of miss some things and then come back, and you know what we're talking about. There might be times where you want to watch the video version and grasp everything that we said to see if you want to. But there are times that you might just be running. You're taking a run for an hour, and then you want to put it on so that you're listening to something that's funny every once in a while, but that you don't have to be attentive to it 100%. And that's the beauty of podcasting, that you don't have to have your undivided attention. You could have some of your attention. A lot of gaming that I do, when I'm gaming, I have a podcast on my screen at the top. I have many screens, and then on the screen at the top, I put a podcast, and I'm sort of listening to the podcast, but I'm gaming, and it sort of gives me that extra thing to be like, oh, okay, cool. And then I'm like, oh fuck, I gotta kill this motherfucker. Clack, 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 clack. But then I'm still listening about the repercussions of the economic warfare in the Middle East, for example.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's really cool. And you're right. I mean, a podcast like ours, it's probably something I can digest whilst doing something else, right? Damn, I don't know. I mean, with all that's going on now, for me, I don't know. I've always been a person who has a hard time splitting my brain, but for a podcast, you don't need that much attention when it comes to something like what we're talking about. So I agree. I do agree with you.
Do you think you can become from now on? Like, do you like the idea of podcasting? And
yeah.
I mean, now you're doing podcasts with me, but I'm saying like the idea of being a podcaster listener. Do you find that idea appealing? And do you think that's something you'll be doing more, or do you think that the format for you haven't been able to grasp it yet, like to actually enjoy and want to listen to podcasts?
No, I since starting with you, I have since tried to start listening to this type of podcast in my dead times. You're right, an hour commute, easy peasy, like the things that you are doing something, but something so repetitive and does not require like a lot of thinking, running, driving, shopping, whatever, things that are just kind of like, mindless. I would definitely rather listen to a podcast, because there's just no way I'm going to pull out my phone while I'm doing these things to watch a video. I can't do that when I'm driving, can't do that when you're doing. So I actually enjoy listening better than watching. If I'm watching, I'm disengaged with anything else that I'm doing. So but I just wonder, where can we go from here? What, now that there's a million out there, now we are in a space that's considered to be mainstream. Podcasts at some point were not mainstream. I would say that they're much more mainstream now than they were before. And where do we develop our in the podcast realm? Spotify already.
I think it's beautiful because this is growing. The fact that it's mainstream, just because there's a million of them, because a lot of people are liking them now. I mean, you could call it mainstream. I don't think that's the word. The word is they've become successful, and people have found a way to enjoy them and digest them, and that's great. I've been digesting podcasts for many years, like over 10 years, before this thing was even something people did. I remember I started watching the Joe Rogan podcast when it wasn't even considered a podcast at that time. It was, he had like 300. When I started watching him, he had like 300,000 followers. Part of it from the career he had already had, and he was just fucking around talking to people. And now he has like 10 million, subscribers in YouTube. Is one of the biggest podcasts. But I think that this is beautiful what's happening, because it's gonna make this more commercial, and people can actually do something that's cool and interesting. The other day I was looking around, because I was searching around podcasts and different niche that people have, and there was a podcast about women and menopause. So this is women that's like 60 or plus, and she's pretty cool, right, from Europe, I think from one of the Scandinavian countries, and she does like this little podcast talking about menopause and her experience, and teaching people about it, and like discussing and helping out shit. I'm like, wow, like I wouldn't even imagine, like that someone would
have that following on a menopause podcast. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, it was like another one of like these kids that like, I'm pretty sure there's other podcasts about this, but like they review cigars and they smoke them and they tell you about them. And like the beauty of this podcast, if they're video or audio version only, is that they could be so specific to interest. And that's what's so cool. I listened to a podcast about skateboarding, and you hear a lot about different characters from back in the old school skateboarding day, and how the fuck else were you gonna get that content? There was not gonna be a show made for that, like in for the NBC or whatever, or
whatever network picks up something like that.
Nah, man. The fact that now you can simply get up and just do this with very little cost to entry makes it so that you can get things in entertainment that you would have never gotten. Like, bro, a minute ago, people might have seen me like get off my chair. It was pretty weird. But I was getting this shit. I mean, not to. I'm not gonna.
What is that? An audio recorder?
I'm not gonna give like, promotion to the brand. But whatever. This is like a basic recorder, digital recorder that costs $100. And if you're not doing video yet with a podcast, this is all you need. You put in batteries, you put in an SD card, you press record, and you start talking about whatever topic it is you wanna talk about, and that's it. Or you can put it in a little tripod, and that shit, just stays like that while you talk about other shit, And while you talk about here, you can even record your computer screen while you go through different things that you want to show, and you don't even need a camera for that if you don't have one yet. And then once you have it, you can but the important part is that you have the content, and that you have the specific things that you want to show to people. And it's gonna be people that might be interested in how you paint that little butterfly with that specific effect, blah blah blah, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
What I want to know is, how is podcasting going to be driven in the future? So we as creators create the podcasts the same way until there's some other technology that makes it even easier, which we can get into. And I think, when we were exploring our options, we saw some pretty cool ones out there. But what's going to drive podcasts forward is going to be the platforms that host them. Right, I'm sure you know more about this, since you Joe Rogan is one that you listen to more often than I. But look at what he's doing now. He's gotten picked up by Spotify exclusively. Right? You want to talk a little bit about that, or maybe talk about what you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to where it's going to go?
I'll explain it real quick. I'm pretty sure people already know, but he announced a few days ago that his whole library of podcasts was going to go to Spotify on September 1st. And then at the end of the year, it was going to be completely off YouTube, and it's only going to be viewable through Spotify. But that's the little detail there. It's going to be viewable, so you're going to be able to also watch it. So this means that Spotify is going to create a video platform along with the audio platform that they have. So this is a big news for everything. And this is big news for talk about what's a sign that says that podcasts are the future? Well, this is a fucking sign right here. Yeah. The biggest podcaster, Joe Rogan, got an exclusivity deal with Spotify. I believe he's one of the first of its kind, especially of that amount of money, over $100 million. Right? And then I'm pretty sure they're gonna have that platform available not just for Joe Rogan. I'm pretty sure eventually they're gonna have that platform for other podcasts that want to have their video podcast put there. And then eventually, I'm pretty sure Spotify is gonna tell creators, like, look, you already have your shit on YouTube and you already have it on Spotify. I want you to only have it on Spotify, and I'm gonna pay you more than we already do, for example.
Yeah.
And people are gonna be consuming a lot more podcasts. And remember when we were talking about in the other episode, there's an episode that's gonna come out. Oh, it already came out. Episode 5, which we talk about Netflix and the different platforms.
Yeah.
And towards the end of that podcast, we're talking about how people are gonna be able to grab their entertainment and make the package as perfect as they want it for them, like very specific. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, you're gonna have podcasts that you subscribe to that you maybe donate $2 a month. But that podcast provide you this video entertainment, and they talk about exactly what you want to hear. Maybe they're not the most famous, maybe they're not the craziest cameras, 4K, maybe they don't have the best microphones, but they talk about the funny shit that you like, or they talk about the fucking hobby that you have, which is like throwing arrows with a bow and arrow, whatever. Well, this guy talks about the best way to do it and the best fucking things to use. And that's very specific. There's no other way you're gonna get that content except through a podcast or video podcast format. Because who the fuck is gonna make there'll be YouTube videos, but and that's something that's already been existing. But the podcast form, which is the audio version, that's the main part of what makes the podcast different from a channel and YouTube is the audio version of it that you can listen to while you're doing different things, while you're riding bicycle on a trail, you know, or while you're traveling in the road for fucking 8 hours. Dude, when I do the travels from Europe to the Americas, it's 10 hours on a plane, bro. So I listen to 4 or 5 podcasts, and I'm able to tolerate it. So that's the I think where it's going.
Yeah, and you were saying it right. Like, I mean, you know, you search up, you know, archery and how to do this and that on a bow, right? But, you know, unless that same creator keeps making videos and going in depth with product reviews, it would be so much easier to have just one of those handheld voice recorders and talk about, well, look, you know, I just picked up this archery bow and this is made out of this composite whatever and blah, blah, blah. And you start to geek out on that. Way easier than having to set up a camera and realize you're out of focus or whatever, you know what I mean? There's less room for error and way much more freedom for a creator to just geek out with its listeners. Listeners will appreciate that more. So, and also, you were mentioning in the last episode about the whole, you know, kind of Patreon business model for creators, where you might be able to donate whatever you feel like donating. But here comes Spotify saying, "Look, I want you, you know, because you have certain status in this realm, I'm going to pay you more." You see, so that actually, at that point, I'm thinking, wow, what a time to be a creator, right? What a time, because you have the access. Now people are competing for you, whereas people TV networks used to compete for you to be on their show or on their channel. Now you are a creator and you're competing to be on a platform, whether it's Netflix, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Prime, whatever. Dude, one thing that I want to talk about in another episode is the smart home skills, the Googles, the Alexas, the Siris, all of these people. That is going to be another branch of everything too, you know, through and what else? I mean, unless you have a video, one of them that play video, it's going to be audio, you know? So that's going to be cool. So
I mean, this is going to be an amazing time for podcasting and entertainment in general, but for podcasting, it's becoming a lot more commercial. It's becoming a lot more viable for people to invest time and money into it. And I think that as it keeps growing, the structure of it is going to be a lot more clear. And you're going to be able to see the streams of people that watch things, and everything's going to be falling into place. And I think the fact that creators have more and more people that want to pay for their content one way or another makes it so they have more leverage, and that allows them to survive and to work better in that environment, you know. Because one thing that I think is important, and I think we will conclude the topic with this one, and I think you will agree with me, the most important thing is for these people that do podcasting like us to remain who you are and to not sell your soul to like a producer or a company because you want the money, and then they're gonna tell you what to say and what not to say. I think the most beautiful thing is to stay real, because this way people are going to listen to you because you're real, even if it's not that many. Believe me, all the podcasts that I listen to them because the people are real and they produce their shit themselves, and I know that I'm getting the real part. So that's the idea.
I agree. Keep it real, keep it fresh, keep it locked into the Broskiedoodles podcast. Thank you so much, everybody, for checking in. We hope to see you in a couple of days. Peace.
Hey guys, thanks for stopping by the Broskiedoodles podcast today. We hope you had a lot of fun listening to it. We had a lot of fun recording it. If you like what you heard, go ahead and smash that like button and hit us up on all of our social handles. Leave us a comment so we can talk to you online and figure out what else to talk about online. So, yeah.